Come to order. As you were here, you know that there has been substantial public interest in smart meters, and for that reason, the Allen Park City Council is having the two presentations come before you tonight. And they are presentations, and the only questions that will come to either of the speakers or groups will come from the mayor and council. The mayor and council are not expressing an opinion on smart meters by their presence here today. The format will be that Mr. David Sheldon will speak for 1.5 hours against the use of smart meters. 15 minutes after his presentation, this complete DTE Energy will present its reasons for smart meters. DTE Energy has said that they are having some scheduling problems, and that's why we had to switch the presentations here. And for those of you who add all those numbers together, realize a council meeting, if both people speak for half an hour or 15 minutes, 6 p.m. can't be the council meeting. But if DTE for any reason is unavailable, we will go forward with the council meeting at 6 p.m. Otherwise, we will commence the council meeting 15 minutes after the last presentation. I want to remind you to treat all our speakers respectfully and refrain from audience outbursts. Otherwise, I shall have to ask you to leave. The presentations are being videotaped for archival purposes only. And with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Sheldon to come forward and begin his presentation.
Thank you, John. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to address the council this evening.
Use the mic.
Mr. Sheldon, can I have you get that? Yeah, if you can get that in front of you, it will help. And the record that.
All right. Okay.
Great.
I'm pleased to address council this evening, and I'm going to try to hold my presentation into between 15 and 20 minutes, so that we might have 10 minutes or so at the end for questions from council. First of all, let me just say a word about who we are. I am David Sheldon, as you said, and I founded an organization known as Michigan Stop Smart Meters. This is something we did 4 years ago, back in 2011, and we have been fighting this issue ever since. We have held public meetings in various cities around the state, and we have teamed up with others. There's another organization called Smart Meter Education Network out of Ann Arbor, headed by Linda Kurtz, and she and I work pretty closely together. Sometimes we do public meetings together. And I wanted to just say a word about, you know, what kind of people we are and what we aren't. First of all, we aren't anti-technology. We are not Luddites. We are not people that are opposed to technology in general. We are not anti-business. I myself, I'm retired now, but my entire career was in the business world, and most of it in high-tech areas. I spent the last 20 years before my retirement as a computer programmer and software developer, and I hold a master's degree in business. So, and I think it would be fair to say that most of the people that are associated with me are not in technology, they're in business. Okay, so with that, let me get started. This is just a little overview of what I plan to cover today. Am I talking loud enough, Guardian? Okay. Just a little overview, and then I want to speak briefly of the role of the Michigan Public Service Commission and how they play in role. And then we talk a little bit about illness caused by radio frequencies. We talk about illness caused by what we call dirty electricity. An engineer would probably call it power quality problem. The privacy issue. I'll say a word about DTE's new opt-out plan, and conclude with, you know, what can local governments do? Is there a role for city governments and county governments in this issue? I'm going to start with a short list of just a brief overview. What are the complaints? What are the beefs with these things? The first one is our contention that it does invade the privacy of the utility customer. that a little more later. The next one is it leaves open the possibility that private data that has been gathered without customer consent will be sold to third parties. This is already going on in California. Next is that for a minority of the population, and we don't know exactly the proportion, but we know it's at least 3% and possibly as much as 8 or 10%. For this minority of utility customers, they will become ill almost immediately after a smart meter is installed on their home. And it's not their imagination, because we know in quite a number of cases where people did not even know when a smart meter has been installed, that they know when they first got ill, and they later put it together with the date of installation of the meter. Another problem is that smart meters have been known in some cases to interfere with medical devices in the home. In one case, I think it was out in Massachusetts, somebody's heart pacemaker was stopped by smart meter radiation, and they nearly lost their life because of it. There is evidence that smart meters will likely cause an increase in cancer and neurological illnesses for the majority of the population 20 to 30 years down the road. So at this point I would say my favorite analogy is what I call the canary in the mine analogy. We know that in the old days of coal mining, I'm sure they have newer methods now, but in the old days, the coal miners worried a lot about buildup of methane gas in the mine because it could asphyxiate them and it could lead to an explosion. And unfortunately, human beings cannot smell methane gas or see it. So it's a silent, a hidden killer. So what they would do is they'd bring a canary into the mine with them every morning. The canaries were really sensitive to the methane gas, and if they saw the canary getting sick, they'd get out of the mine real fast. And I would make the analogy here that, okay, maybe it's a small portion of the population that immediately gets sick. 3%, 5%, 8%, whatever. Some people would say, well, that's tough, you know. In order for the majority to have the convenience of being able to closely monitor the energy usage and perhaps conserve energy, maybe we need to ignore this small minority that's got an issue. Well, what I'm suggesting, and there's a lot of research that's in peer-reviewed journals that would support this, that minority that immediately gets sick may be like the canary in the mine. It should be a warning signal to all of us that in 20 or 30 years we might all get sick. And of course, it's not just the radiation from smart meters. That's just one more thing layered on top of cell phone radiation, Wi-Fi, all the rest of it. We live with so many devices today that put out radio frequency. Smart meters just adds another layer. Maybe it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Plus, it's on 24/7, 365. We can't turn it off. You're exposed to it while you sleep. Okay, so isn't the Michigan Public Service Commission the proper forum for our complaints? I'm sure that's a thought that has occurred to some of you. And the answer to that is it should be the proper forum. When the legislature created the MPSC, it gave it a very broad charter to regulate not only the prices or rates that we pay for electricity, but also the terms and conditions of service. It's all in the charter. But the MPSC in recent years has taken the position that the type of meter being offered electric customers, that is, quote unquote, a management decision, and they bow out. When utility customers complained to MPSC 3 years ago, they were told, and this is a direct quote, quote, "We do not interfere with the utilities' business practices," unquote. One might well ask, then what is your purpose? Because that is what they were created for, was to interfere with the utilities' business practices, because the legislature recognized the monopoly power, where we had only one electric provider that could arbitrarily dictate policies. So they were created to regulate business practices, but they aren't doing it. The MPSC is on record as stating that DTE and Consumers Energy, quote, "need no permission from us, unquote, to implement smart meters. Okay, so what do smart meters do? Well, very briefly, they collect far more data about our electrical usage than a traditional analog or electromechanical meter that we're all familiar with. They relay this information in real time to the utility by radio signals. They are also planned to act as gateways for communication by the electric utility to and from individual appliances within our homes. That is, once the home is installed, the next generation of appliances that will contain smart chips. And that will come. Whirlpool Corporation announced a couple of years ago that beginning this year, 2014, they will make no appliance that is not a smart appliance. So pretty soon there'll be no choice. As you replace your appliances, you will wind up with a house full of smart appliances that will be talking to your smart meter, which in turn will relay all of that detail to the utility company. So my question, is all this data collection really necessary? We would say no. It reveals information to the utility and possibly others, third parties, about the lifestyles of utility customers and heretofore private activities within their homes. So let's examine some of the arguments that the utility makes and see if they really need all this data collection. Why do they say they need it? To encourage customers to conserve energy and to shift some of their energy demand to off-peak times of day. Okay, if that could be accomplished, it's an important thing because whether they need to build new power plants depends on the peak load. If they can shift some of that consumption to off-peak, maybe they don't have to build a new power plant, or maybe that's good for the environment. So that would be their argument. Conservation of electricity is to be encouraged by providing customers the ability to see their energy usage by the hour through an internet display or in real time on a home monitor. But do smart meters really conserve energy? And we say the answer to that is no. And we say that because there have been a number of studies done. Pilot studies were done by DTE, by Consumers Energy, and by many of the other utility companies around the United States. No pilot study to date has shown real evidence that customers changed their behavior because the smart meter was installed, or that they changed their behavior enough to make a real difference, like more than 1%. Well, why else do they say they need to collect all this data? Well, they want to eliminate the cost of meter readers. That's understandable. That's a labor savings. But there are systems in use by other utilities called AMR systems, which automatically transmit monthly reads to a drive-by vehicle. They do it only once a month, and they don't have most of the problems that we associate with smart meters. Are smart meters necessary to promptly report power outages? That's a favorite argument. Utilities say they want to be alerted to power outages so they can restore power more quickly after a storm. They can dispatch service personnel more quickly to pinpointed locations. But smart meters are not necessary to do this. All I need is a radio, a device that sends out a radio signal with battery power. Doesn't have to be on every home either. It could be one for each block that sends them a signal when there's an outage on that block. Here, I'm just briefly touching on what is the pattern of emissions. In that diagram, we're looking down on a smart meter that's attached to the outside of the home. And the reason I show this is because a lot of people think or believe, or been told that the radiation, the radio waves from the smart meter project in a directional way out from the house and that they don't go back into the house. Well, that's just not so. That red circle up there indicates, the diameter of it indicates the intensity of radiation. And you see that it's going in all directions except for a very little notch at the bottom. Straight out the back of the meter, there's a little area where no radio waves propagate, but that's only 15 degrees to either side of center. Once you get outside that 15 degrees, the radiation is almost as strong as it is out the front. Okay, what are some traits of the smart meters? Well, they communicate with the utility using wireless radio frequency radiation, or RFR. and that's in the microwave range. It's basically almost the same frequency that's used in your microwave ovens. It's, in the case of DTE, it's approximately 902 megahertz. They don't use continuous waves, they use pulsed waves, and I'm going to show a diagram of that in a moment. Each brief transmission reaches high intensity peaks, but peaks are usually average over 30 minutes when they take readings, so that tends to hide the peak energy level. This is what it's like. I wish I had a pointer. Well, let me try to do this without walking up to the screen. You see a series of those red spikes. Those are the energy peaks. And we know that in the case of DTE, these spikes come off the meter about once every 15 seconds. I personally measured them on my neighbor's smart meter. And I get a big energy spike, 15 seconds of complete silence, then another spike, and so on, every 15 seconds. Well, when the utility sends somebody out to check the energy levels, they'll use a meter that averages that stuff. And because of all those silent periods in between, the average power density is pretty low. That horizontal blue line near the bottom is the average power density. Now, it turns out that the effects, the biological effects on humans and other living things, is determined by that peak power level, not by the average. Each pulse could be something like 50 milliseconds long, but it can have a 1 watt peak pulse intensity, which is many times higher than what the FCC says is legal. And it is the average, but the FCC standards are based on heating human skin, and it's the average power that would cause heating. But the peak intensity causes the biological effects. What do pulsed microwaves do? They're a lot more damaging to living things than the type of radiation that we've known for many, many decades. You know, like radio broadcasting, TV broadcasting, that's all more or less continuous radio wave, not pulse. This is pulse. And what that does is it breaches the protective blood-brain barrier. It affects neurotransmitters, it affects testosterone levels, can decrease sperm production, affects the natural rhythm of the brain, can affect heart rate and heart rate variability. Now, you don't just have to take my word for all that stuff. We have the scientific research to back up everything I just said. My group's website is michiganstopsmartmeters.com, and I would encourage anyone who has an interest in pursuing this or getting the backup data to visit our website. There's a lot of the original research there. There are links to the original research. In particular, there's a paper by Dr. Andrew Goldsworthy from Great Britain. There's the Bioinitiative report, which is a collaborative done by many scientists. The great research on mouse brains, the work of physicist Daniel Hirsch, and the extensively researched article by Diane Olkins. Those are some of the better articles. There are lots of others. So why do utilities falsely claim that smart meters are safe? Well, they say it meets the FCC guidelines. That's usually the first claim. Then they say, well, it's less exposure than you would get from a cell phone or other common devices. You're comfortable with those, right? So why shouldn't you be comfortable with a smart meter? And they're saying it's only transmitting 1 to 2% of the time, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? Well, first of all, the FCC guidelines are obsolete. They were drafted 30 years ago to protect a 6-foot, 200-pound male from the thermal effect, that is heating of his skin, in an industrial situation. Acute exposure in an industrial situation. They only tested over 30-minute intervals, and the protection is only from one exposure from one device, not from cumulative exposure from many devices. And it's for a single exposure, not 24/7. The FCC guidelines provide no protection from non-thermal biological effects, no protection from pulse signals, peak energy, or cumulative exposure from all sources. I see, I better speed it up a little bit, we're going out of time. It uses pretty much the same frequency as a cell phone, but researcher Daniel Hirsch, nuclear physicist in California, did an extensive study on that that he published. that shows the total body exposure from a smart meter is 100 times greater than from a cell phone. Classifying the radiation from cell phones and smart meters as a possible carcinogen. And they, in 2001, had issued a report classifying extra low frequencies as a possible carcinogen. There's effects on the body's melatonin, it's a natural hormone. All our bodies make it. It's very helpful to preserve quality of sleep and to do many other things. I'm going to bounce through these guys quickly. Studies were done that show the increase of Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's disease is much greater in people that have used cell phones intensively over a period of 10 years or more. Now we have this other issue, which we call the dirty electricity issue. You see that green wave that runs through there? That is the 60-cycle current that's supposed to be circulating through our home wiring. But all that jagged red stuff, that's something else that's also circulating through the wiring of many homes today. And it's caused by, mostly by switch mode power supplies. The smart meters contain a switch mode power supply that's badly filtered and causes a lot of that stuff. But other devices in the home can cause it too. But it's cumulative. The smart meter is adding another layer to that stuff. That stuff causes health complaints, cognitive functions, sleep disruption, headache, depression, irritability, nausea, and so on. All of those are related to that dirty electricity issue. And there's a reason why I have to mention this. What causes it? The switch mode power supply. Okay, I think I did that one. Now, you will hear this from utilities. I know DTE has made this statement on many occasions. Quote, all we are doing is measuring your total electric usage, unquote. And they seek to discredit any reports that that they have any other objectives, that they're trying to see what appliances you're using or anything else. That's their mantra. But utilities implementing smart meter programs, this is about as disingenuous as it gets, because utilities nationwide are looking at marketing the data that the new meters harvest. In California, they're already doing so. They've been given the green light by the Public Service Commission in California to sell people's private data. Moreover, and the utilities are well aware of this, they are installing these smart meters in part to have a communications interface to all the smart appliances that you're going to be forced to put in your home, which will ultimately allow the utility to monitor and control individual appliances within our homes. They don't like to talk about that so much. They just talk about what the immediate objectives are. Once a smart electrical meter is installed, even before you have the smart appliances, a lot of information about your daily activities will be revealed. Each appliance has a unique signature based on how current it draws and the way it draws it. The output of a smart meter looks something like this. If they're sampling every minute, it will look like this, but without the labels, refrigerator, toaster, kettle, and so on. That's what you'd see if you could look directly at the output of the smart meter. Now there are software programs that will take that data and identify which particular appliances are running from that data. In California, they have permission to sell it, and software is on the market that will transform the raw data into usable information about lifestyle habits, kinds of appliances being used. A battle is in progress. Who controls the data? Who would want this information? Insurance companies, employers, marketing companies, and police. Federal privacy guidelines are not being followed. The National Institute for Standards and Technology, that's NIST, they formed a working group to study and recommend appropriate standards for protecting people's privacy within a smart grid system. They are well aware that smart meters intrude upon privacy, and that's why they felt it necessary to develop standards. The utilities will not let smart meters intrude on privacy, but I think this is more credible. They issued a report in August 2010. Here's what they recommend. Choice and consent. An organization or an individual homeowner should be clearly, fully, and accurately, an organization, that would be the utility, should clearly, fully, and accurately describe the choices available to individuals and to the extent practicable, obtain explicit approval for the collection and use of their personal information. Consumers should have the option to forego data collection and services that are not related to the core services provided by the organization. Well, clearly, I think DTE, Consumers Energy, and most of the utilities in the United States are in violation of that. Now, that's not something that has teeth. That's not law. That's just a recommendation, but nobody's following it. DTE's opt-out plan. If you sign up for their opt-out plan, you're agreeing to have a non-transmitting smart meter installed in your home. You agree to pay $67 up front and $9.80 a month, indefinitely or until their next rate increase. No business customer is eligible to participate in this. No healthcare practitioner can participate, and no apartment dweller or condominium dweller where they have banks of meters can participate in this plan. Only, single homeowner, single house homeowner. DTE customers are not informed that there even is an opt-out plan unless they first turned away an installer. If the installer showed up and they were ordered off the property, or their meter was locked and the installer could not install a meter, then they get a letter informing them about this opt-out plan. Otherwise, 99% of the public doesn't even know there is an opt-out plan. How am I doing? Can I take about another 5 minutes?
You have another 5 minutes.
Yeah. Economic foolishness. DTE is unwilling to simply leave the existing analog meter in place for those customers who want to opt out. Instead, they insist on installing a smart meter. First, they plan 2 trips. First, to install a smart meter, and then a second follow-up visit to turn off its radio transmitter. Now, if that person moves out and another person moves into that home and wants a smart meter, that requires a 3rd trip to turn the transmitter back on. Yet DTE has claimed under sworn testimony before the MPSC that the non-transmitting smart meter offers no advantage for the company over the traditional analog meter. It gives them no more information than an analog meter. Michigan's Attorney General, it's Bill Schuette's office, attacked this aspect of the DTE plan. And the bad economics was developed in much greater detail by Linda Kurtz in her brief that's now before the Michigan Court of Appeals. Okay, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. We say, I'm trying to be charitable when I say economic foolishness. The alternative is that it's an attempt, a deliberate attempt to run up the cost that will make the opt-out unaffordable to many. DTE is also insisting on opt-out customers that every meter must be manually read every month. Now, reading every meter every month may have made sense when it could be done on a mass basis and the cost per read in an MPSC testimony was only 15 cents per read. But these opt-out reads, they call them special reads because they're not part of a mass reading route. And that's the reason why they have to charge nearly $10 a month to opt-out customers. It would be reasonable for the company to consider alternatives, such as letting customers report their own readings. In fact, the Attorney General did suggest that. DTE would not hear of it. The company seems determined to maximize the cost to opt-out customers. They could do it by maybe just doing special audit reads a couple times a year to make sure the customers are honestly reporting, but they won't. The benefits from this plan are meager. There's no relief from the privacy invasion. The non-transmitting meter is still a smart meter and has a memory to store all your detailed electrical usage. Direct RF radiation from the customer's own meter is eliminated, but not from his neighbor's meters. Utility customer can still get sick from that dirty electricity that I spoke about. When an electrosensitive customer visits a healthcare practitioner, a doctor, chiropractor, whatever, they're going to be exposed to all of this RF because their healthcare practitioners are not permitted to opt out. What do we recommend people do? We recommend that they should, if at all possible, refuse installation of either a smart meter or an opt-out meter. That they lock their meter housing and refuse installation. If a smart opt-out meter is already installed, they should demand its removal and consider self-help if the meter is not removed. That they should let their state legislative representatives know how they feel and urge their local governments to pass resolutions directed primarily to Michigan's Attorney General, urging that he enforce existing laws to protect homeowners. Okay. I'll skip the last couple of slides in the interest of time, and if I could, I'd like to take a few questions from any of you.
Good question by council.
No question.
I was just being quiet. I do have another question. Why is it that you can't just let the people, why is it you can't let the people that want to opt out, let them opt out, and don't put those charges on them? We have a lot of seniors, we have a lot of families that it's a hardship for them, these.
Well, that's a good question, and I guess probably DTE should be the one to answer that one. They insist that they must install smart meter in every home, whether it's radio on or radio off. They say analog meters are obsolete. We think that's not so. Consumers on the other side of the state is letting people keep their existing analog meters. We don't see why DTE couldn't do it as well. But that is their position.
But when it's off, you're going to charge them the $9.80 a month,
Yes,
$67 upfront fee? That's what I'm talking about, is the upfront fee and the $9.80 a month.
Yeah,
And I don't think that's proper.
I would agree with you. It's not proper. And one of the reasons it's not proper is because you're making people pay to avoid a known harm. I mean, alcohol did that in old Chicago, and look where it got him.
What is the problem with the pacemaker? You mentioned pacemaker.
Well, it's just that you have all this electromagnetic energy that is flowing through the house. And some of that is because of the dirty electricity on the home wiring, and some of it's from the radio frequency. And pacemakers are electrically sensitive devices. And under some conditions, it could misfire because of that radiation. We know also that smart meters are setting off garage door openers too. We've only had a few reports of heart pacemakers actually fail. I don't want to over stress that point, but it is a possibility and it does happen. So
How will someone know that the pacemaker is failing?
I can still feel like I don't know. Okay.
Let me, if I may, Mr. Mayor, you used the term radiation and radio frequency seemingly sort of interchangeably. I don't know the difference, I'm not a scientist, but I heard those, and sometimes it was radiation, sometimes it was radio frequencies. And a secondary question to that, I suppose it's related. At one time, in my early days, in remembering microwave ovens, there were signs everywhere. Don't come in here if you have a pacemaker. But those signs are all gone now. I don't know if that was radio waves, radiation, or what that was, but obviously there's been some change in that technology or whatever. And then the other final point, I guess I'd make, maybe to address these in turn, is that the various kinds of ailments and illnesses you attribute to this device, whatever it may do, and I must confess I'm totally baffled by the whole argument, but you know, anywhere from autism to heart failure to diabetes to iron poor blood, I suppose, or whatever. It seems like every possible malady extent is possible based on this technology. And I guess I just have a hard time getting my head around that.
Okay. Well,
Mr. Sheldon,
yes.
can I ask you to speak into that microphone when you turn your
I'm sorry. Well, let me answer the last question first. Okay. I think the reason for that, and I would agree, it does seem like there's an awful lot of maladies connected with this. I think the reason for that is that we're electrical creatures. The human body relies on sending electrical impulses from our brain through our spinal column, our nerves, that control the pace of the heart rate, that cause the heart to speed up when greater blood flow is needed, for example, that regulate our breathing. All this is done by electrical signals. Well, there are also chemical signals, but a lot of the signals are electrical in nature. That's why we're vulnerable. There's also an issue with calcium ions on cell membranes. Electrical potentials on cell membranes determine how many calcium ions enter a cell. And when you start subjecting the body to these electrical fields, that can affect the calcium transport into cells. So, I mean, when you start messing with the cells, the cell membranes, the nervous system, sure, there's a potential for a lot of illnesses. On your first question, radio waves versus radiation, I should clarify that. Because a lot of times when we use the term radiation, we're thinking of things like nuclear radiation, the kind that you use a Geiger counter to measure. This is called ionizing radiation. It's way above the visible light spectrum, and it's the most dangerous kind because it can mutate our DNA. And when we get a CAT scan in a hospital, they're using that kind of ionizing radiation. And so there's a lifetime limit to how much of that we can be exposed to. The kind of thing we're talking about here, and I did use the term radiation, but it's really, and it is radiation, but it's non-ionizing radiation, which is below the visible light spectrum. And it is not as dangerous as the other kind, but it can still be dangerous.
We've gone past the 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I did, the first screen you had a web page, but I don't know if that was yours. You said that you might make your email available to anybody that might have other questions that they would like to ask you. And if you could give us that email address for the people in the audience.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. Our webpage is MichiganStopSmartMeters.com. And my personal email, and I would be glad to hear from any of you that would like to email me a question, I will respond. My email is fdshell@gmx.com, and I'll spell that for you. It's F like in Frank, D like in David, SHEL, 1L, @gmx.com. And that's G like in George, M like in Mary, X like in Valentine. Feel free to email me your questions, I will respond. I'd like to thank council for listening.